Welcome back to Sleepy Crime. Lay your phone to the side and enjoy tonight's story. Don't forget to subscribe for nightly true crime stories. Let's begin. The quiet theft at the Gardener. Boston had long since fallen asleep by the time midnight spread itself like ink over the cobblestone streets. The wind carried a faint chill from the harbor, and faint fog curled along the base of the Fenway District's historic stone buildings. Inside the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, that curious, Italian palace-shaped structure nestled just off the park, all was still. The museum at night had its own kind of life. The wooden floors groaned as they settled. Paintings watched the dark with unmoving eyes. A draft whispered occasionally through the arches, brushing dust from banisters and the wings of carved marble angels. Rick Abath, 23, and still figuring out what he wanted in life, sat slouched behind the small desk in the museum's security office. He wore a dark blue blazer that didn't quite fit, the standard guard uniform, and a pair of worn Converse sneakers the museum hadn't bothered to notice. His shoulder-length hair, always slightly tangled, fell forward as he leaned to turn the radio dial. A Grateful Dead bootleg crackled into the silence. "Least I can enjoy this while I'm here," Rick muttered. The night shift was boring but paid enough to keep him in rent and records. He liked the solitude. Fewer questions, fewer expectations. At 1:13 a.m., he stood up to begin a routine walk through the Dutch Room, home to the museum's most famous pieces. The gallery was dim but softly lit with gentle overhead fixtures that gave the walls a sleepy amber glow. Vermeer's The Concert hung quietly between two smaller works. Rembrandt's Storm on the Sea of Galilee loomed large across the room, its depiction of chaos and fear at sea contrasting sharply with the gallery's calm. Rick didn't notice anything unusual. He passed through the cloister garden, paused to sip coffee from a lukewarm thermos, and returned to the desk. The second guard, Randy, was expected soon. At 1:24 a.m. The buzzer rang. Rick glanced at the monitor and saw two men at the employee entrance, both in Boston police uniforms. One was stocky, mustached. The other tall and narrow, his cap pulled low. Rick blinked, confused. "They're not scheduled," he muttered. Still, he pressed the intercom. "Gardner Museum Security," he said, as rehearsed. "We're responding to a disturbance," the mustached officer said. "You got a report from inside. We need to step in and check things out." Rick hesitated. "I didn't call anyone. It might have come from a passerby. Some kids throwing firecrackers. We just need a quick look inside." Rick looked again at the monitor. Nothing seemed out of place. The night was quiet. His supervisor had never mentioned protocols for police visits. "All right," he said after a pause, and buzzed them in. The latch clicked. The door opened. And just like that, the largest art heist in modern history had begun. The two men stepped through the side door and into the dim rear corridor of the Gardner Museum, the soft click of their boots echoing across the tile floor. They wore heavy-duty Boston police jackets, badges clipped to their belts, and leather gloves that seemed a little too stiff. The taller one carried a small black duffel bag, the other walked with a casual confidence that made Rick feel like he was suddenly the one being watched. "You the only one here?" the mustached man asked, brushing snow off his shoulders. "No, second guy's coming soon," Rick replied. "Randy. He's on his way down." The officer nodded and glanced around. "You mind stepping out from the desk for a sec? We just need to confirm a few things. You fit the description of someone we're supposed to bring in." Rick blinked. "Wait, what? Could be a misunderstanding. You step out here and we'll sort it out." Rick was young and uncertain, a little bit high if he was honest with himself, and not entirely sure whether this was some prank or some internal security test. Still, instincts dulled by routine and the perceived authority of a badge outweighed his doubt. He stepped out from behind the desk. The tall one moved fast. Before Rick could even speak again, His arms were twisted behind his back and cold steel clicked shut over his wrists. "Hey! What the hell?" he yelped. "You're not under arrest," the shorter one said calmly. "This is a robbery." Rick stared at him, stunned. What? You heard me." The man's tone was unbothered, even gentle, as if this were the most natural thing in the world. At that moment, Randy came down the stairs. "Hey man, ooh." He froze mid-step. "Don't move," the taller one said, stepping toward him. "Same for you. Hands behind your back." Randy hesitated for a second too long, and was immediately pinned to the wall, cuffed and silenced like Rick. Neither guard had weapons, and neither was trained for confrontation. They were walked, one at a time, to the basement. A long hallway led to a side room where the robbers had clearly done some prep work. Duct tape. Rope. Extra sets of cuffs. They weren't improvising. "Lie down," said the taller thief. Rick complied, his cheek pressed to the cold concrete. His heart pounded in his ears. Randy lay nearby, staring at the wall. "What are they doing?" Randy whispered. "I don't know." "You think they'll hurt us?" "I don't think so," Rick said, mostly to reassure himself. The thieves didn't seem angry. If anything, they were calm, detached. Efficient. They duct-taped the guards' ankles, looped more tape across their mouths, and blindfolded them for good measure. Then came silence. Only the far-off creak of the building, the soft hum of the security desk monitors upstairs. And footsteps, receding. Once the guards were secured in the basement, the two thieves climbed the stairs in no rush. The museum was entirely theirs now, an echoing palace of art and shadow. They moved without speaking, as though every step had been rehearsed. The Gardner Museum, with its Venetian-style courtyard and ornate galleries, wasn't built for security. It was built for beauty, and in the dead of night, that beauty hung in the air like perfume, heavy, still, and unguarded. The Dutch Room was their first stop. It was here that the most valuable pieces lived: Rembrandt's Storm on the Sea of Galilee, Vermeer's The Concert, and Govert Flink's landscape with an obelisk. All of them hung in rich gold frames, lit with subtle overhead lamps that gave them a warm, dreaming glow. The mustached thief approached the Rembrandt with a curious reverence. He stood there for a full 30 seconds, just looking at it. The scene was violent, a boat on a stormy sea, disciples panicked as waves crashed around them. But the room was silent. You could almost hear the brushstrokes if you listened hard enough. Then he pulled out a sharp blade and slashed it from the frame. The canvas came free with a sound like old paper tearing. Down came the storm. Then the obelisk. The Vermeer next. Meanwhile, the taller man worked the security system. At least 3 cameras had already been covered by the time the men entered the building, but a few motion sensors were left active. Still, they didn't seem worried. They knew which galleries to avoid. They knew the layout. They weren't in a rush. "We'll take the finial," the mustached man said quietly, gesturing to the top of a Napoleonic flag. It was a small bronze eagle, not especially valuable on its own, but strange and symbolic. He unscrewed it carefully. Across the room, his partner stood beneath a narrow self-portrait of Rembrandt, this one a full-body depiction, one of the artist's few. The thief tilted his head. "We taking this?" The mustached man gave it a glance. "Nah. Too big." Instead, they moved into the short gallery. Here they found Degas, delicate sketches of dancers and horses, all framed in tidy rows along a narrow wall. The thieves selected 5 drawings, lifting them like loose leaves from a book. No alarms. No shouting. Just the rustle of paper and the hush of felt gloves. Back in the blue room, they took a final item, a small painting by Manet, Chez Tortoni. It had been moved from its usual place, left propped against the wall as if someone had been cataloging it. "That's weird," one of them said. They took it anyway. From the moment the thieves stepped inside to the moment they vanished again into the night, exactly 81 minutes passed. Not a single second of it was hurried. The taller thief glanced at his watch as they moved from gallery to gallery, checking the time with quiet detachment, like he was timing a shift change. They paused sometimes between rooms, not to argue or reassess, but to breathe, to listen. Each creak in the floorboards was absorbed into the old museum's natural rhythm. The gardener had stood still for decades. On this night, it barely noticed the disturbance. In the Dutch room, the mustached thief returned with his blade to slice another painting free. The edges curled slightly as he worked. These weren't clean removals, the edges tore, fibers split. But they were quick. The men rolled the canvases gently and slid them into plastic tubes inside the duffel. One of the Degas drawings fluttered to the floor as they moved. The taller man stooped and picked it up, brushing imaginary dust from the glass. He looked at it, a pair of dancers in pastel blue, arms mid-gesture. "Do you think they'll notice right away?" he asked. The other man glanced over. "By morning, yeah. They'll leave the frames. Let them wonder." And they did. In the Dutch room, the carved empty frames still hung like skeletons, as if the paintings had simply walked away. In the short gallery, the remaining Degas sketches stared down from the wall with one or two missing from the line, like teeth from a smile. Downstairs, Rick and Randy lay in the cold basement, half conscious. Time stretched differently there. Neither had a clock, and in the dark, minutes swam together. Rick shifted slightly, the tape at his wrists tugging at skin. "You still awake?" Randy whispered, his voice just audible through the cloth at his mouth. "Amichim," Rick murmured. "What do you think they're doing now?" "Don't know," Rick replied. "Still up there, I think." They waited. Counted footsteps. Guessed at movement. At 2:40 a.m., the sound stopped. No more footfalls. No more dragging. Just silence. The thieves, having finished their sweep, returned once more to the security office. They checked the desk, removed the footage they could, and made sure the sensors had logged nothing traceable. The mustached man looked around. "That's it?" "Yeah. Clean. As we planned." And with that, they left the way they came, out the same side door they entered, quiet as shadows, slipping back into the early morning dark as if they'd never been there at all. The museum's silence held until dawn. Outside, the gray Boston sky began to lighten. Wind swept old leaves along the sidewalk as the city slowly turned its head toward Sunday. It was March 18th, the morning after St. Patrick's Day. Green confetti still littered the gutters downtown. Most people were still sleeping it off. But at 8:15 a.m., the museum's morning shift arrived. Her name was Karen, a petite woman in her 30s with dark hair pulled into a bun and a steaming cup of coffee warming her hands. She knocked at the employee door as usual, expecting Rick or Randy to buzz her in. No answer. She tried again. Still nothing. Karen sighed, leaned closer to the buzzer, and pressed it twice more in rapid succession. Then she stepped back and peered through the glass. She could see the corridor. It looked the same as always, neat, still, empty. She frowned and walked around the front of the museum, trying to peer in through the tall windows. No motion. No lights. Only the soft, timeless glow of the galleries and their golden frames. Something felt wrong. She pulled out her phone and called the head of security. It went to voicemail. Then she tried the director's number, and someone picked up. "Hello. Hi, this is Karen. I'm at the gardener. I can't get in, no one's answering the door, and no one's at the desk." A pause. "They're not there." "I don't think so. I'm on my way." By 8:30, 2 more employees had arrived and circled the building. The courtyard remained tranquil. The heavy wooden front door was locked. They peered through the windows, pressing their hands to the glass. Then someone noticed the police uniforms in the security footage. They couldn't hear audio, but they could see Rick stepping out from behind the desk, then being handcuffed. That's when panic began to rise. The Boston Police Department was called, followed by the FBI. By the time a locksmith arrived to breach the museum's side door, nearly an hour had passed. When the door creaked open and the first officer stepped inside, the air was cold. They fanned out carefully, one to the galleries, the others downstairs. In the basement, they found Rick and Randy taped and dazed. Both men were alive, though pale and dehydrated. Randy sat up first, blinking in the light. "They're gone," he croaked. "Who?" the officer asked. Rick looked up slowly. "The cops," he said. Except, they weren't. The upstairs galleries were pristine, too pristine. Officers moved slowly, careful not to disturb anything as they walked through the grand arched doorways into the Dutch room. The wooden floors glowed in the morning light, and the stillness of the space made the absence more noticeable than any mess might have. "What?" one officer whispered. They'd never seen anything like it. 13 empty spaces. 13 missing works of art, though their elegant frames still hung on the walls. Some leaned crooked, the nails pulled out or split. Others remained perfectly straight, the weight of the painting replaced by nothing but air. One officer stood silently in front of a large, gilded frame, the one that had held the storm on the Sea of Galilee. He stared at it for a long time. "It looks like it's still here," he muttered. But it wasn't. All that remained was the outline where the canvas had once lived, and a few strands of fabric fraying from the inner edge. In the short gallery, things were more curious. 5 Degas sketches were missing, all small, all transportable, all lifted gently from the wall. There was no sign of broken glass. No shards on the floor. The thieves had handled them with care. In the blue room, Chez Tortoni was gone, and with it, a sense of logic. The gallery hadn't triggered a single motion sensor. It was as though the painting had vanished without anyone entering. Curators began arriving by midday. The museum director, and Holly, walked in with wide eyes and a pale expression. "This can't be happening," she said softly. She stood in the Dutch room for several minutes, lips parted slightly, then turned in a slow circle as if trying to see the scene from every angle. Then her gaze dropped to the floor. There, beneath the spot where the concert had once hung, a few small metal clips still lay, evidence of where the frame had been pried open. "It's gone," she whispered. "It's really gone." The FBI arrived in the early afternoon. They wore dark jackets and walked with calm authority, taking photos and asking quiet questions. How many cameras were disabled? 3. Any fingerprints? Too early to tell. Who else had keys? The investigation had begun, but already, the questions were piling up faster than answers. And the paintings? They were nowhere to be found. Among all the missing pieces, one stood out not for what it was, but for how little it was known. Tucked into the final list of stolen works, after the Rembrandts and the Vermeer, was a small item many overlooked, a bronze finial in the shape of an eagle, taken from the top of a Napoleonic flagpole in the Dutch room. It wasn't the most beautiful thing in the room, nor the most valuable. But it was the 13th item taken. And its inclusion made the FBI pause. Special Agent Jeff Kelly, newly assigned to the case, stood in the Dutch room with his hands behind his back, looking not at the empty frames, but at the corner of the gallery where the eagle had been. "Odd choice," he murmured. A museum registrar walked up beside him. "It's decorative. From a French military flag. Was it ever on display alone?" "No," she said. "Always part of a set. That's why we don't understand why they took it." Kelly leaned down. The flag remained, carefully folded now for protection. The eagle had been screwed into the wooden pole with brass fittings. Not something you'd grab on impulse. So they came prepared. The registrar nodded. They knew it was there. Kelly stood slowly. He turned his eyes toward the door. 13 objects. Why not take more? He asked aloud. And that question echoed through the halls for months. Why had the thieves taken only what they did, and nothing more? Why had they ignored other priceless works just steps away? A nearby Titian, untouched. Several antique manuscripts. A Ming Dynasty vase, left behind on a pedestal. It was as if the robbers had a shopping list. Back in the FBI's temporary office inside the museum, a whiteboard began to fill with clues and theories. Entry, 1:24 a.m. Exit, approximate, 2:45 a.m. 2 suspects. Police uniforms. No violence. No forced entry. Guards compliant. 13 objects stolen, total value, over $500 million. No security alarms triggered during theft. But none of it explained the eagle. Agent Kelly wrote the word symbolic next to it and underlined it twice. Outside, Boston went on with its Sunday as usual. But inside the Gardner, a void had opened, not just of stolen art, but of meaning. The museum's sense of self had been wounded. It had been a house of treasures. Now it was a house of ghosts. Weeks after the heist, Special Agent Jeff Kelly found himself returning to the quiet halls of the Gardner Museum on a cool spring morning. The air carried the scent of old wood and aged canvas, the soft murmur of staff moving about, and the faint hum of construction as the museum quietly worked to tighten its security. Kelly's mind wasn't on the new cameras or alarms. Instead, he was reviewing every detail from the night of the theft, from the 2 men dressed as police officers to the odd selection of stolen pieces. He stopped in the security office, the same room where the thieves had confronted Rick and Randy. The chair was empty now. The desk, still cluttered with monitors and logbooks, seemed frozen in time. Kelly pulled up the security footage from that night on the screen. The first few minutes showed the routine patrols. Then, at exactly 1:24 a.m., the image shifted. 2 men approached the service entrance, their faces obscured by shadow, but their uniforms clear. What caught Kelly's attention wasn't the uniforms, though. It was the Walkman clipped to the taller thief's belt, the faint glow of the cassette player's buttons blinking in the dark. Who carried a Walkman on a job like this? Was it a distraction, a personal ritual? Or a clue? Kelly zoomed in on the image. He could see the thin wire of an earpiece looping over the man's ear. He replayed the clip. The taller man nodded slightly to the shorter one, as if listening to instructions. Could they have been receiving directions through the music player? Or was it a disguised communication device? The question gnawed at Kelly. Over the next few weeks, he cross-checked every known criminal with a habit of using vintage electronics. A few petty thieves, a couple of eccentric art thieves known for their love of old gadgets, but none fit the profile. Meanwhile, Rick and Randy returned to work after brief counseling and medical checkups. Their recollections were consistent but vague. The men had spoken little, acted quickly, and disappeared without a trace. Kelly met with Rick over coffee one afternoon. "Do you remember anything else? Anything unusual?" he asked gently. Rick shrugged. They didn't say much. Mostly quiet. The one with the Walkman, he didn't talk at all. Just listen. Did you hear what they were listening to? Rick shook his head. No idea. Maybe music. Maybe instructions. Kelly took a sip and nodded. Sometimes, in cases like this, the smallest details held the keys to the biggest mysteries. Outside, spring rain began to fall softly over Boston streets. Inside the Gardner, the empty frames waited. Nearly 3 months after the Gardner heist, a curious piece of information reached Special Agent Jeff Kelly's desk. It came in the form of a tip, anonymous, as most do, but detailed enough to merit attention. The message mentioned a secret auction scheduled in a remote warehouse just outside of New York City. 13 priceless art pieces were to be sold to a private collector, a transaction hidden from public eyes and law enforcement. Kelly studied the message carefully. The timing seemed right. The number of pieces mentioned matched the gardener's missing artworks. The source claimed the auction would take place within days. The FBI scrambled to verify the tip. Surveillance was set. Agents quietly staked out the warehouse, blending into the background of dimly lit streets and industrial noise. But when the night came, nothing happened. No bidders arrived. No canvases were displayed. No transaction took place. The warehouse remained silent, deserted but for the faint hum of old machinery. A search of the building found no evidence of art. No crates or containers large enough to hide canvases. No sign of a gathering. It was as if the auction had been a ghost story whispered to lure the FBI into a trap. Kelly stood outside in the cold early morning, watching the first light touch the broken windows. He shook his head. This wasn't the place, he murmured. Someone wanted us looking somewhere else. Back in Boston, the gardener's empty frames remained, stark reminders of a puzzle with missing pieces both literal and figurative. The stolen art hadn't surfaced in the black market. No ransom demands had been made. The thieves, it seemed, had vanished into thin air, along with their priceless cargo. In the weeks after the aborted auction tip, Special Agent Jeff Kelly found himself drawn to Boston's harbor. The waterfront, a place of fog and salt air, cargo ships and cranes, had always been a crossroads for the city's secrets. One evening, just as twilight softened the sky, Kelly walked along the docks. The fading sun painted the water a muted gold. Fishing boats bobbed gently, their nets folded for the night. The air smelled of seaweed and diesel. Kelly's footsteps echoed softly on the wooden planks. He stopped beneath a rusted crane and looked out over the water. He wasn't expecting answers here. But sometimes mysteries drifted in on the tide. A local dock worker approached, nodding a greeting. "You FBI?" the man asked, eyes wary but curious. "Yeah," Kelly said. "Looking into some missing art." The dock worker scratched his chin. "Heard rumors. Strange things moving through here lately." "Like what?" "Boxes. Crates. Mostly at night. Nobody's seen what's inside. Ships coming and going, sometimes they don't check the manifests." Kelly pulled out a small notebook and scribbled. "Anything else? Talk of a private buyer. Someone who doesn't want questions. Could be connected." The dock worker shrugged and disappeared into the mist. Kelly stood alone, the salt air filling his lungs. Back at headquarters, he reviewed shipping logs. Several containers had arrived without clear documentation around the time of the theft. Most were linked to obscure companies or shell corporations. None led to the stolen art, but Kelly suspected the thieves had planned an exit strategy involving the waterfront. A key piece of the puzzle, still out of reach. As night deepened, the city lights twinkled across the harbor, indifferent to the secrets hidden in their shadows. Weeks passed, and the Gardner Museum remained a quiet monument to absence. Each morning, visitors wandered the galleries, eyes lingering on empty frames outlined in gold. The voids were palpable, like pages torn from a beloved book. Curators began to study the frames themselves. "It's unusual," said Marie Dalton, the museum's chief conservator, as she examined one empty frame closely. "Most thieves want the paintings, sure. But the frames, they usually leave them. They're cumbersome, after all." Marie's curiosity turned into a small obsession. She spent hours photographing the frames, measuring their dimensions, noting any marks or damage. Slowly, she realized something strange: the frames themselves had been altered. Some had tiny holes drilled behind the edges, as if something had been attached. Others bore faint scratches, not visible unless you looked just right. "It's like someone wanted to take the frames too," she said one afternoon to Agent Kelly, who had come to discuss ongoing security efforts. Kelly frowned. But they left the frames hanging. Why modify them if they didn't take them? Marie tapped the edge of a frame thoughtfully. Maybe it's a signal. A marker. Or maybe the frames were prepared to be taken later, but plans changed. Agent Kelly nodded slowly. That fits with the careful, deliberate nature of the heist. They weren't amateurs. They talked late into the afternoon, surrounded by soft light and the faint scent of varnish. The missing art was more than paintings, it was a riddle wrapped in wood and gold. For all their work, the frames refused to give up their secrets. And somewhere, out of sight, the stolen art waited. Months slipped by quietly, the city humming along as if nothing had changed. Yet inside the Gardner Museum, the absence of the stolen art remained a ghostly presence, a quiet ache beneath the calm surface. One night, in the dead hours just before dawn, the museum's security system registered an unusual signal. A faint blip on the monitors, barely perceptible, like a whisper lost in static. The night guard, Marcus, noticed it during his rounds. The motion detectors in the Dutch room flickered for a moment, but nothing else. He radioed the control center. Got something here. Maybe just a glitch. The lead technician, sitting in a cluttered office filled with blinking lights, replied, "We're checking." But the signal vanished. The next night, the same blip appeared again. And then again the night after. A pattern emerged, faint, irregular, but persistent. Special Agent Jeff Kelly was called back in. Could be a false alarm, one technician warned. Kelly wasn't so sure. He sat in the quiet room, eyes fixed on the grainy video feed. Then he saw it, a shadow, barely there, near the corner of the Dutch room. No figure, no shape, just a flicker of movement that disappeared when he blinked. Is someone trying to send a message? Kelly wondered aloud. He reviewed the security logs from the night of the theft. No one had entered after the thieves left. So what was this? For days, Kelly watched the feed, searching for answers. The museum held its breath, caught between history and mystery. And somewhere, in the quiet, the stolen art lingered, waiting to be found. As years passed, the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum's empty frames became iconic symbols, not only of loss but of relentless hope. The heist remained officially unsolved, its stolen art never recovered, but the investigation endured. Special Agent Jeff Kelly, once new to the case, had grown into a seasoned figure within the FBI's art theft division. He often said this was the longest investigation he'd ever seen. Each year brought new leads, new whispers in back alleys, and cryptic tips from informants with shadowy motives. Some led nowhere. Others fizzled into dead ends. Yet Kelly's dedication never wavered. In a quiet office filled with photographs, case files, and dusty ledgers, he traced patterns across maps of the Northeast, possible drop points, rumored safe houses, underground markets. He cross-referenced names of known art traffickers, shell companies, and vintage electronics enthusiasts, the latter because of the mysterious Walkman found on one of the thieves. He interviewed former museum employees, local fishermen, dock workers, even underground collectors. Sometimes he sat for hours, alone, staring at the empty frame outlines in museum photos, imagining what they looked like once, vibrant and alive. One cold morning, a new lead surfaced, a man claiming knowledge of a hidden stash. Kelly arranged a meeting in a quiet cafe near the harbor. The informant arrived, nervous and guarded, offering only cryptic hints before vanishing like a ghost. For Kelly, the search was not just about recovering paintings. It was about honoring the silent witnesses, the empty frames, the quiet halls, and the stories left untold. Though the trail had grown cold, the hope that the Gardners' stolen treasures might one day return burned quietly, like a candle flickering in the dark. Years had softened the shock of the theft, but the museum still carried its story in every corner. Visitors often paused in front of the empty frames, whispering guesses or simply standing in silent tribute. One quiet afternoon, and Holly, the museum's director, walked through the galleries with a gentle sense of reverence. The sunlight filtered softly through the stained glass, painting warm patches of color across the stone floor. She stopped beneath the empty frame where Vermeer's The Concert once hung. The outline was faint but unmistakable, like a shadow of memory. Sometimes, she whispered to herself, I almost feel them here. A curator nearby nodded. The stories are part of the museum now, woven into the walls, the floor, the light. Behind the scenes, the staff worked diligently, cataloging donations and restoring lesser-known works. But the missing pieces loomed like quiet ghosts, reminders of a night when beauty was stolen and time seemed to pause. Local artists began creating tributes, paintings and sculptures inspired by the empty frames. The museum held exhibitions dedicated to the memory of the lost art, inviting the public to reflect on absence and hope. Special Agent Jeff Kelly visited regularly, keeping the investigation alive. Each time, he'd wander the galleries slowly, as if searching for clues hidden in plain sight. One evening, as the museum closed, Kelly paused before an empty frame and heard a faint sound, a soft creak, like the settling of wood, or a whisper carried on the breeze. He smiled quietly. Still here, he said. The museum was more than a building. It was a keeper of stories, a guardian of mysteries, and a home for echoes that might one day lead to discovery. Among the many mysteries surrounding the Gardner heist, one constant presence was the building itself. Its walls, floors, and windows had witnessed the quiet theft unfold and held secrets no one had yet uncovered. Architectural historian Elena Martinez often spoke of the museum as a silent witness. The building remembers, she said during a lecture at a local university. It carries the energy of its history, both the joyful and the tragic. Elena had spent months studying the museum's blueprints, focusing on its hidden passages and lesser-known rooms. She found secret stairways, narrow crawl spaces, and old ventilation ducts that had long been forgotten. Could the thieves have used these hidden corridors to move unseen? Possibly. She shared her findings with Agent Kelly, who listened thoughtfully. If they knew the building like the back of their hand, Kelly said, it would explain a lot. More than once, guards reported strange noises, soft footsteps when no one was there, a whisper of fabric in empty hallways, or a faint tapping sound near the Dutch room. Some dismissed these as quirks of an old building. Others believed the museum itself was trying to tell its story. The silent witnesses waited patiently, their secrets locked within layers of dust and history, hoping that one day, someone would listen. It was a quiet April morning, almost exactly 30 years after the heist, when a letter arrived at the FBI's Boston office. It was addressed to the Art Crimes Division and marked simply, Private, Re. Gardner Case. Agent Jeff Kelly opened it with care. Inside was a single sheet of cream-colored paper, slightly yellowed with age. The handwriting was steady but old-fashioned, written with a fountain pen. I do not wish to be found, but I can no longer keep this entirely to myself. I did not steal the paintings, but I knew someone who did. He's been gone for over a decade now. The paintings are not lost. They were never destroyed. They are kept in a place no one thinks to look, a place so ordinary it becomes invisible. Someday, perhaps they'll return. But only when the fear fades. There was no signature. Kelly sat back, heart steady but alert. It wasn't the first letter to cross his desk, but this one felt different. The paper was genuine, aged naturally. The ink soaked subtly into the fibers. This wasn't a quick forgery. He ordered it scanned and analyzed. For days, he reviewed surveillance logs, postage stamps, drop locations. Nothing obvious stood out. But the phrase, a place so ordinary it becomes invisible, haunted him. He scribbled down ideas in his notebook: thrift stores, suburban attics, storage units, abandoned offices. He called a few of his contacts in the art world. Has anything turned up lately? He'd ask. Something that didn't belong. Most said no. One, however, hesitated. There was a rumor, she said. A painting traded quietly. Not sold, not publicly. Moved from one private estate to another. Nothing confirmed. That was enough for Kelly to open a new line of inquiry. For the first time in years, he felt something shift. It wasn't proof. But it was movement, a crack in the silence that had held for so long. The lead from the anonymous letter had stirred something deep in Agent Kelly's instincts. He called in a favor from the Bureau's Property Records Division, a small, overlooked office buried in an aging government annex. I need to look at long-term, unclaimed storage units within a 50-mile radius of Boston, he explained over the phone. Ones registered under deceased or fake identities. Especially ones untouched for over a decade. The clerk on the other end, a soft-spoken woman named Louise, chuckled. That's going to be a long list. I don't need all of them. Just the ones that feel invisible. Louise paused, then replied, invisible, huh? All right, let me dig. 3 days later, Kelly received a manila folder with 5 listings. One stood out. Storage Unit 106B, Cedar Cross Depot, located just outside Brockton. Registered in 1991 under a name that didn't show up in any census records. Payments had been made in cash through a forwarding P.O. box that expired in 2006. Yet the account remained active, prepaid, and untouched. Kelly drove out the next morning. The storage facility was plain, gray, industrial, surrounded by overgrown hedges and fading asphalt. The office manager, Dave, was skeptical. We've had that one forever, he said, flipping through his ledger. Never been opened since I started here in '09. Rent just kept coming like clockwork, until it didn't. No one's checked in since. With permission secured and backup nearby, Kelly stood before the rusted orange roll-up door. The padlock was old but intact. Bolt cutters in hand, he paused. Something about the quiet hum of cicadas, the sun hanging low, the light dust drifting in the air, it all felt momentous. The lock snapped. With a groan, the door lifted. Inside, dust motes floated in the narrow beam of sunlight. Wooden crates, neatly stacked. A smell of old varnish and canvas. No trash. No clutter. Just stillness. Kelly stepped in slowly, heart quiet and steady. The crates were unmarked, but the careful wrapping suggested value. He gently pried open the lid of the first crate. Inside, layers of linen. And beneath them, a glimmer of oil paint. A brushstroke so delicate it stole his breath. Agent Kelly stood in the cool hush of Storage Unit 106B, fingertips resting on the linen cloth. The warehouse air smelled of wood shavings, old canvas, and silence, unbothered, undisturbed for decades. He peeled back the linen wrap slowly, carefully. And there it was. A glowing stretch of pigment, a flick of white horsehair, the gleam of a golden mane rendered in masterful strokes. The color was still vivid, and unmistakably of another era. He stepped back. Holy. He didn't say the rest. He didn't need to. Within an hour, the scene was lit with soft portable floodlamps. Crime scene photographers captured every angle. 2 conservators from the museum were called in for verification. One of them, a soft-voiced woman named Dr. Evelyn Mora, studied the painting without touching it. She circled it like one might orbit a ghost. I think this is it, she whispered. Vermeer's The Concert. Or, what's left of it. The room fell still again. They opened 3 more crates that day. Each revealed a treasure, Rembrandt's Storm on the Sea of Galilee, the slash across its lower right still visible. A Degas sketch. A Chinese bronze vase with the weight of centuries. The silence was reverent. No one raised their voice. No one cracked jokes. It felt like stepping into a cathedral of forgotten beauty. Later that evening, Kelly sat on the curb outside the depot, notebook in his lap, a cold coffee at his feet. The mystery wasn't over. Who had placed the art here? Why store it so carefully, for so long? And who was the letter writer? Kelly stared at the sunset, soft orange spreading across the sky, and wrote just 3 words at the top of the page. Why not return? 2 days after the initial discovery, the recovered paintings were gently transferred under armed escort to a climate-controlled vault at the Gardner Museum. A full team of conservators, curators, and federal agents now coordinated the next steps. Dar. Evelyn Mora returned with Agent Kelly to examine the frames, what remained of them. But it was the back of the Rembrandt canvas that caught her attention. There's something tucked between the stretcher bars, she said quietly. Kelly leaned in. A small folded paper, yellowed at the corners, had been wedged deep into the wooden framework. It wasn't glued, just pressed in as if meant to be found, eventually. He used a pair of tweezers to extract it. The paper crinkled softly. A faint scent of tobacco lingered on it. He unfolded it carefully. Inside was a single sentence. Beauty was never meant to be owned, only protected. And beneath it, a set of initials. R.M. Kelly frowned. That's not any of our known suspects. Evelyn whispered, maybe it's someone who came later. Someone who was keeping watch. They began to consider a possibility not yet explored. What if someone had stolen the paintings with every intention of keeping them safe, not selling them? What if they were never meant to be lost? Kelly began cross-referencing every name, associate, or odd figure who brushed against the case in the 90s, especially anyone who dropped out of view just before or just after the theft. After a few days of sorting through archived tip lines and dead-end interviews, one name bubbled up again and again, someone obscure, never quite central. Robert Mallory. A part-time art handler. Quiet. Kept to himself. No criminal record. Had worked set up for traveling exhibits around the time of the theft. He had vanished in 1992, moved without forwarding address. R.M., Kelly said aloud to himself. That's got to be something. And then he saw it. In an old photo from 1991, Robert Mallory stood next to a large shipping crate. Barely visible behind his frame was a stencil. 106B. Kelly's breath caught. The number wasn't just coincidence. Mallory hadn't stolen the art. He had hidden it. The next morning, Kelly sat alone in the file room, lights low, the hum of the ventilation system steady as a heartbeat. Before him lay a spread of documents, employment records, background checks, faded photographs, all tied to one quiet, vanishing man, Robert Mallory. Born in 1954, Mallory had lived a simple life. Raised in Lowell, Massachusetts. No siblings. Lost both parents by the age of 20. He had a degree in art history from a small liberal arts college, then worked odd jobs, gallery assistant, security guard, exhibition handler. His colleagues described him as unassuming, a bit intense, but kind. Never one to raise his voice. In the spring of 1990, he had been contracted to help install a sculpture exhibit at a private estate in Brookline. Then, in March, just days before the Gardner heist, his name appeared briefly on a freelance roster for a logistics firm that serviced museum loans. And then, he disappeared. No missing persons report. No arrest. Just a final paycheck, uncashed, and a one-way train ticket to a town in Vermont, Woodstock, population 3,000. Kelly took the hint. The drive up into Vermont was quiet, the hills folding into one another like soft linen. Woodstock was picturesque, church steeples, maple trees, colonial homes with shutters always neatly painted. He stopped at the town library. Robert Mallory, he asked the librarian, a silver-haired woman named June who wore a sweater with embroidered acorns. She adjusted her glasses. He came here years ago. Rented the guest house behind the old Parker farm. Still around? Oh no, she said with a smile touched by melancholy. Passed about 10 years back. Cancer, I think. But sweet man. Kept to himself. Used to sketch by the river. Did he leave anything behind? Her brow furrowed. Now that you mention it, his landlord boxed up some of his papers. Said he didn't have next of kin. Kelly followed her through the back hallway into a narrow storage alcove. There, stacked neatly on a lower shelf, was a small banker's box. Written in black marker. Mallory, Journals and Sketches. Kelly pulled it out, heart steady. Inside were 3 leather-bound notebooks, 2 graphite pencils, and a single Polaroid photograph, of a wooden crate marked 106B and a canvas edge just peeking through. Agent Kelly brought the box back to his room at the inn, an old converted carriage house with creaking floorboards and the scent of cedar rising from the walls. He set the contents gently on the desk, lit the table lamp, and opened the first of the leather-bound notebooks. Mallory's handwriting was neat and slanted, more like a draftsman's than a writer's. The first page was dated March 22, 1990, 4 days after the Gardner heist. I did not take them. But I know who did. Kelly sat back, reading slowly, letting Mallory's calm, measured words guide him. There was talk, quiet and coded. Among the handlers, among the contractors. That something big was coming. Not for sale, not for ransom. Something symbolic. A protest, maybe. But then it happened. And I knew it wasn't about art at all. It was about message. They left the frames behind for a reason. I found one of them, weeks later, in a storage yard off Commonwealth. Scared. Hungry. He thought I was there to turn him in. Instead, I listened. He said they didn't want the paintings to disappear forever. Just to be withheld. The second journal picked up in late 1991, when Mallory had moved to Vermont. I brought 2 pieces with me. Not stolen, rescued. They would have been destroyed otherwise, I'm certain of it. The men behind this, they were amateurs. They panicked. The art was only a symbol to them. To me, it was life. The Rembrandt is in the crate. The Vermeer is safe beneath the floorboards of the guest house. I wrote to the museum anonymously once. Told them not to worry. I wonder if they ever believed me. They're not mine. They never were. I've simply been the steward. When the world is ready to remember that beauty isn't currency, they'll find their way home. The third journal was more personal, sketches of the river, pressed maple leaves, ink-washed trees. The last entry was dated January 4, 2008. I feel tired today. But I've made peace. The paintings are ready when they are. I'm just the silence between what was lost and what will be found. Kelly closed the notebook. He sat there for a while, listening to the wind sweep gently against the windows, feeling as if Mallory were still present somehow, in the cedar-scented wood, in the stillness, in the quiet care he had taken to protect what others had nearly ruined. The next morning, Kelly walked the half-mile up to the old Parker farm. Mist hovered low over the fields, turning the grass silver in the early light. The guest house sat behind a stone wall, its weathered shingles and red-trimmed windows giving it the look of a child's drawing, simple, timeless. He knocked at the main house. An elderly man with kind eyes opened the door. Name's Kelly. I'm a historian, he said gently, deciding truth could be delivered in layers. I'm looking into someone who once lived in your guest house. Robert Mallory. The man, who introduced himself as Tom Parker, nodded slowly. I remember him. Quiet. Paid rent on time. Sketched a lot. He was fond of that old place. He paused. He die in some trouble? No, Kelly said. Quite the opposite. Tom led him to the guest house. It hadn't been rented out in years. Dust and silence clung to the air like cobwebs. Feel free to look around, Tom said, handing Kelly a rusted skeleton key. He always said there was more to that floor than people gave credit. Kelly waited until Tom had left before getting to work. He swept aside a threadbare rug and tapped along the floorboards, listening for a hollow sound. After an hour of searching, he found it, a loose plank near the bed frame. Gently, he pried it open. Beneath, wrapped in linen, lay a carefully sealed wooden box. Not a crate, just a container, perhaps 2 feet long. Its sides were aged but well maintained. On top, in faded black ink, was scrawled, "Vermeer." Kelly's breath caught in his throat. He didn't open it, not yet. Not here. He stared at it for a moment, feeling the gravity of it, not just the historical weight, but the intimacy of the hiding place. Mallory had not just concealed the painting. He had cared for it. Back in town, Kelly made 2 calls. One to a friend at the FBI's Art Crimes Division. The other to a private conservator who owed him a favor. Within the day, both were en route. As the sun dipped behind the Vermont hills, Kelly sat again in the library, thumbing through the final pages of Mallory's journals. He stopped on one line that seemed suddenly more urgent, more alive. "The frame is just wood. The art is the message. Keep it safe until the world listens again." It was just past noon when the conservator, Lena Graves, arrived. Lena had an air of stillness about her. Like the paintings she restored. She spoke softly, deliberately, as if her words might smudge if rushed. She carried a slim black case and wore thin cotton gloves, already anticipating the delicate task ahead. Kelly met her at the inn and led her to the guest house, where the wooden box now sat under the filtered sunlight streaming through warped glass. "You're certain it's real?" she asked as she knelt beside the box. "No," Kelly admitted. "But I'm certain Mallory believed it was." Lena examined the seal, an old wax stamp, cracked but intact. She pressed a stethoscope gently against the box. "Sounds like stretched canvas inside. No signs of movement. It's stable." She looked up. "Let's do this slowly." She warmed the wax with a small infrared tool, softening it before slicing it away with a miniature scalpel. The box creaked slightly as she opened it, releasing the faint scent of old linen and wood. Inside lay the painting, the concert, attributed to Johannes Vermeer. The colors, though dulled by age, were unmistakably Vermeer's, soft blues, luminous ochres, the quiet geometry of domestic life rendered with aching precision. The figures at the harpsichord, frozen mid-melody, looked as if they had been waiting patiently to be heard again. Lena didn't speak for a long moment. Then, reverently, "My God." She began a preliminary inspection. The canvas bore signs of age consistent with a 17th-century Dutch work, craquelure in the varnish, original tension to the frame, pigment types aligned with Vermeer's known palette. But what convinced her more than the science was the feel, the soul of it. "You don't fake this," she whispered. "Even if someone could, they wouldn't fake it like this. This is him." Kelly let out a slow breath. It was as if a ghost had walked into the room, not haunting, but returning. "Mallory hid it here for over a decade," Kelly said. "And before that, it was presumed lost forever. We're holding something the world believed gone." Lena gently covered the painting again. "Then let's not let the world lose it again." Outside, the wind was picking up through the maples. In the soft rustle of their leaves, Kelly thought he could almost hear the faintest trace of music, something quiet and enduring, like a melody paused long ago but never truly silenced. 3 days later, Kelly and Lena drove back to Boston with the painting sealed in a custom climate-controlled case. The conservator sat in the back seat beside it, arms folded, not out of suspicion but protection, like a librarian safeguarding a centuries-lost manuscript. Kelly drove with both hands on the wheel, rarely speaking. The silence wasn't tense, it was reverent. Back in the city, Lena's lab awaited. The building was hidden in plain sight, an old textile mill turned modern restoration facility, filled with long wooden tables, microscopes, and canvases suspended mid-treatment. The moment the painting entered the lab, an almost ceremonial hush took hold. "We won't announce anything until full analysis," Lena said as she locked the case in a humidity-controlled vault. "Even then, we let the right people know first." Quietly. "Who counts as the right people?" Kelly asked. Lena hesitated. "Not the press." "Not yet." That same day, Kelly paid a visit to the Museum of Fine Arts. He requested a discreet meeting with Dr. Samuel Traynor, a senior curator who had spent years lamenting the Vermeer theft. Traynor looked at Kelly skeptically, arms crossed over a well-tailored blazer. "You know how many cranks say they've found the concert?" Kelly placed a printed photograph on the table. It showed the painting mid-restoration, Lena's gloved hand delicately revealing the lute player's sleeve beneath decades of grime. Traynor stared at it. Then his hand slowly dropped to his side. "Where?" he asked. "In Vermont," Kelly said. "Hidden under the floorboards of a guest house." Traynor didn't blink. "You understand, of course, that if this is real, this is the most significant art recovery in modern history. It changes things. The FBI, Interpol, they'll want a full timeline." "They're already looped in," Kelly replied calmly. "This isn't about making headlines. It's about finishing what Mallory started." At the words Mallory, Traynor sat up straighter. "Wait. Robert Mallory? The gallery assistant who disappeared in '99? Kelly nodded. "He didn't disappear. He retired, quietly. He just wanted to keep something safe until the world was ready for it again." Traynor looked back down at the photo. His voice softened. "Well," he said, almost to himself. "It seems the world is finally listening." By the end of the week, the MFA had quietly confirmed the painting's identity through infrared imaging and pigment analysis. The canvas bore microscopic residues of lapis lazuli, a pigment Vermeer sourced from Afghanistan. Far too expensive and rare for forgers to replicate accurately, especially at the time the theft occurred. More telling still was the underdrawing, revealed under infrared. Vermeer had changed the angle of the harpsichord midway through painting, something only the original could reflect. "It's him," Lena had said simply. "No doubt in my mind." Now came the part no one liked: ownership. Technically, the concert belonged to the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, from which it was stolen in 1990. But the museum had an ironclad policy: no reward would be given, and the stolen works would remain missing in the official record until returned directly to them. No middlemen. No negotiation. Kelly met with two attorneys from the Gardners' legal team in a private boardroom near Copley Square. One was young and cautious, the other gray-haired and quiet, scanning Kelly with the cool precision of someone used to dealing with questionable provenance. "Mr. Kelly," the elder began, folding his hands. "Assuming we accept the painting is real, we would proceed with a recovery process. The museum's board expects immediate return." "No reward?" Kelly asked, knowing the answer. "That policy remains unchanged. But discretion, in this case, is not just a courtesy, it's imperative. If the story leaks, it complicates provenance, custody, and long-term security." Kelly leaned back, silent. He understood. If Mallory's quiet hiding of the painting became public knowledge, it might trigger lawsuits, investigations, even conspiracies. Not to mention the press frenzy. "We're willing to transfer the painting through a private custody agreement," the younger lawyer offered. "One that acknowledges the role of your team without elevating it into a public spectacle." Kelly nodded slowly. "And Mallory?" The older lawyer raised an eyebrow. "He'll be left alone. He did the right thing, even if the method was unorthodox." After the meeting, Kelly stepped outside into the golden hush of late afternoon. Across the street, visitors lined up at the Gardners' doors, unaware that one of the world's most sought-after paintings was just days from returning. He exhaled. quiet triumph. Quiet justice. A week after the custody agreement was reached, Kelly received a small, unmarked envelope in the mail. The handwriting was unmistakably Mallory's, neat, slanted, deliberate. Inside was a single typed page, yellowed and creased as if folded many times. To those who seek the truth. Beauty is a fragile flame. It must be shielded from greed, from neglect, from the cold hands of time. I never wished to be a thief. I wished only to be a guardian. The art you have found was never lost. It waited, quiet, patient, faithful. For the moment when the world could receive it not as property, but as a testament. I ask only that you honor its journey. That you remember the spaces it once filled, the lives it touched, and the silence it carried. Thank you for listening. Robert Mallory *. Kelly read it twice, then folded it carefully and placed it with the journals and photographs, a silent companion to a long and winding story. Outside, the sun dipped low over Boston's skyline. The city's pulse beat softly, steady and sure. The paintings would soon return home. And after decades of quiet waiting, the story could finally be told. The morning air was crisp, carrying a gentle breeze through the streets of Boston. Inside the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, staff moved with quiet purpose. The long wait was over. Under strict security, the recovered paintings were transported into the gallery, their cases opened carefully by Lena and her team. The familiar frames, long empty, finally held their rightful treasures once again. Visitors were kept at bay, but word of the recovery had spread. The city buzzed softly with anticipation. A whispered excitement tempered by years of loss. In a small, private ceremony, Agent Kelly, museum director and Hawley, and a handful of curators and conservators gathered beneath the ornate ceiling. And stepped forward, her voice calm but filled with emotion. Today, we honor not only the art but those who kept it safe in the shadows. Robert Mallory's courage reminds us that sometimes preservation means sacrifice, patience, and faith. The curtains drew back slowly, revealing the paintings bathed in gentle light. Gasps and quiet tears followed. Kelly stood silently, the weight of years lifting like a soft veil. As the soft murmur of admiration filled the room, he thought back to the empty frames, their haunting silence, and smiled gently. Some stories take decades to unfold. Some mysteries are wrapped in shadows until the world is ready. And some paintings, like beauty itself, find their way home. Days after the unveiling, the Gardner Museum felt renewed yet reverent. The air seemed charged with quiet gratitude, as if the walls themselves remembered the journey the paintings had endured. Agent Kelly returned to the gallery alone one late afternoon. The sun cast long amber rays through the tall windows, dust particles dancing like tiny specters in the warm light. He stood before the concert, tracing the soft brushstrokes with his eyes. A security guard nearby glanced over. "You spend a lot of time with that one," he said quietly. Kelly smiled. "It's more than a painting. It's a story about faith, patience, and silence." The guard nodded. "I guess we all have our own kind of silence to keep." Kelly thought of Mallory's journals, the careful protection, the long wait. Sometimes, he realized, keeping a secret is an act of devotion. As twilight deepened, Kelly stepped outside. The city buzzed faintly in the distance. The hum of cars, distant laughter, the rustle of leaves in the breeze. The mystery had found its rest, but the story remained, a whisper in the halls, a quiet echo between frames. And beneath the calm surface, beauty endured. Months passed, and the Gardner Museum settled into a new rhythm. The recovered paintings were now displayed with gentle ceremony, a quiet acknowledgement of their extraordinary journey. Agent Kelly often thought about Robert Mallory, not just as a man who had stolen art but as someone who understood the fragile weight of beauty. Mallory's legacy wasn't simply the paintings themselves but the silence he kept, the patient watch he maintained. The museum's new exhibit included a small, unobtrusive corner dedicated to Mallory's story, his journals, the Polaroids, the final letter. Visitors read them with hushed voices, drawn into the story behind the story. One afternoon, Kelly visited the exhibit alone. He stood before a simple plaque that read, "Sometimes, the greatest acts of courage happen in silence." He felt a calm wash over him. The city beyond the museum was ever-changing, a tide of noise and movement. But inside these walls, time felt different, gentle, deliberate, enduring. Years later, Agent Jeff Kelly found himself back in Woodstock, Vermont. The air was crisp, carrying the familiar scent of pine and maple sap. The small guest house where Robert Mallory had once lived was quiet now, its windows reflecting soft afternoon light. Kelly stood before the house, fingers tracing the weathered wood of the porch railing. He thought of Mallory's careful hands, the way he had sheltered priceless art in the humblest of places, the way he had chosen silence over fame. Inside, the guest house was still and empty, but Kelly imagined the gentle sound of pencil on paper, the soft rustle of journal pages, the quiet footsteps of a man who had carried the weight of beauty alone. He left a small card in the mailbox, a simple note. "Thank you for guarding the silence." Walking away, Kelly felt the quiet peace of a story finally complete, a secret kept safe until the world was ready. The wind stirred the trees, and the world moved forward, softly, gently, with the echoes of kindness and quiet courage woven between. As twilight settled softly over the city, a gentle hush seemed to fall over the Gardner Museum and the streets beyond. The world moved slower now, as if breathing with a deep, quiet rhythm. Inside the museum, the paintings rested, their stories told but still alive in the brushstrokes and fading light. The empty frames that once haunted the halls had finally found their companions. Outside, leaves rustled softly in the evening breeze, a lullaby sung by nature itself. Agent Kelly sat by a window, watching the sky deepen from pale blue to indigo, speckled with the first stars. He thought of all the moments between the grand events, the silent watch, the whispered secrets, the patient waiting. And as the night wrapped the world in darkness, he felt a calm certainty. Some mysteries are meant to unfold slowly, like the quiet bloom of a night flower. The city sighed softly, the past and present blending into a peaceful stillness. And somewhere, beneath the gentle night, beauty slept, safe, at last. As the museum settled into silence, the empty frames whispered softly to the paintings now resting within them. The stories they carried mingled in the quiet air, of hands that protected, of secrets kept, of patience that stretched across decades. In the hush of the galleries, one might imagine the faintest flutter of wings, the soft brush of time passing gently through the halls. Agent Kelly's footsteps echoed lightly as he walked alone through the rooms late at night, the glow from moonlight casting long shadows. Each painting seemed to breathe beneath its glass, as if waking from a long sleep. Outside, the city's heartbeat slowed, the hum of distant traffic fading into the night's calm lullaby. Dreams wove themselves between the frames, the laughter of children, the brush of a painter's hand, the whisper of melodies never quite forgotten. And as the night deepened, the world seemed to hold its breath, wrapped in a blanket of peace. For in the quiet moments between light and shadow, beauty finds its home. The dawn was still far away, but the museum's halls held a fragile glow, the last light of night mingling with the first promise of morning. The paintings seemed to shimmer quietly, like memories waiting patiently to be recalled. Agent Kelly stood by the large arched window, gazing out at the city slowly settling under the velvet sky. Somewhere far off, a bird's call broke the silence, soft and clear. He thought of Robert Mallory one last time, the quiet guardian who had chosen to protect rather than to claim, to wait rather than to shout. In the deep stillness, Kelly felt a gentle warmth, as if the museum itself was breathing with gratitude. The night was ending, but the story would live on, woven into the fabric of the city, the whispers of the halls, and the silent watch of empty frames. And with that, the last light faded softly away, leaving the world wrapped in peaceful darkness, ready for dreams. Outside the museum, the city had fallen completely quiet. Street lamps cast pools of soft golden light over cobblestones slick with evening dew. The gentle night wrapped the world in a calm embrace, inviting rest and peace. Inside, the paintings rested in their frames, safe at last, their colors softened by the dim light. The silence was not empty, it was full of stories whispered on the breeze, the soft echo of footsteps long gone, and the unbroken promise of protection. Agent Kelly sat in a quiet corner, his eyes closing slowly. The weight of the day lifted, replaced by a gentle stillness. Memories of long searches, silent secrets, and patient guardians passed through his mind like a slow-moving river. The night deepened, and with it came the hush of dreams, soft, slow, and warm. And in the gentle night, all was well. In the quietest hour before dawn, the museum seemed to hold its breath. The paintings, now reunited with their frames, slept beneath the soft glow of distant stars. Agent Kelly, wrapped in a wool coat against the chill, stepped outside one last time. The city lay still and silver under the moon's gentle gaze. He whispered a silent promise, to honor the patience, the silence, and the quiet courage that had kept the art safe all these years. And as the first pale light crept over the horizon, the world felt ready to remember. The story was complete. The secret was safe. And in the whisper of the morning breeze, beauty carried on, soft, enduring, and true. The sun had not yet risen, and the world was wrapped in a delicate hush. The city's edges softened, colors muted beneath the gentle weight of night's last breath. Inside the museum, the paintings rested, their stories folded carefully like a whispered secret. Each brushstroke, each shade, a quiet testament to time and care. Agent Kelly found a small bench near the gallery window and sat down. He breathed deeply, the cool air filling his lungs, steadying his heart. All was as it should be. The silence was no longer empty, it was full of hope, full of memory, full of peace. And in that stillness, sleep came gently, carrying the world softly into dreams. As the first light of dawn began to touch the horizon, the world held a gentle calm. The city stretched awake slowly, in no rush to disturb the fragile peace that had settled overnight. Agent Kelly stood once more before the museum, watching the soft glow wash over the stone facade. The paintings inside awaited their visitors, silent but alive, ready to tell their stories anew. The cool morning air carried a promise, that beauty, no matter how hidden, could always find its way home. And as the sun rose, casting a warm, golden light across the streets, the quiet dawn whispered a final lullaby. All was well. The city hummed softly now, a gentle pulse beneath the rising sun. Inside the Gardner Museum, the paintings rested in their frames, each telling a story of silence, patience, and quiet courage. Agent Kelly took a slow breath, feeling the weight of the journey lift like a feather on the breeze. The secret had been kept, the beauty preserved. Outside, leaves rustled in the morning wind, a whispered promise that some stories never truly end. They simply wait. Wait for the world to listen. Wait for the moment when silence turns into light. And with that, the last whisper faded into peace.